Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Well, we're back, listeners. Welcome back to a new edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. This is Joey Kaufman. I'm joined by Bill Rabinowitz. We've not been in your podcast feeds for a few weeks with various vacations and summertime stuff. It's a slower time of year, obviously, for the Buckeyes, but things are heating up. We were at Big Ten Media Days last week in Indianapolis, and training camp at Ohio State starts on Thursday, August 1st. So football is just around the corner.
Yeah, we had really started last week with Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis. Ohio State went on the first day, and nothing revelatory, I wouldn't say. I mean, they embrace this natty or bust kind of motto that if it's anything short of a national championship is a disappointment, which that's a very high bar. It's very hard to win a national championship, but this is a very hungry team. It's a very talented team. So they feel like they have every reason to think that they can make a real run for it, which they do.
Yeah, it's certainly to follow all the national storylines around Ohio State. So much of it is encapsulated in that term, and the players have embraced it, as you said, Bill, natty or bust. But you look through a lot of recent Ohio State seasons, and it often feels that way too. I mean, we go back a couple years ago, Ohio State had C.J. Stroud back for a second year as a starter. You knew you probably were going to have him much longer than that. And their preseason number 2, and that's a national championship window. And then you go to Justin Fields' season in 2020. COVID certainly disrupted that. I remember Ryan Day calling it had the potential to be a generational or a once-in-a-lifetime team. So it always feels like there are these moments for Ohio State where you got to capitalize. And this year feels like no exception to that with all the returning seniors on the roster. It's so veteran heavy that it feels like this is as good an opportunity as Ohio State has had in recent years, although there are still questions at quarterback and offensive line, which is largely where we were at this time last year.
Yeah, what's funny is that, what's not funny to Ohio State fans is that, Ohio State's only won 2 national championships since 1968, and both of those, 2002 and 2014, kind of came out of nowhere. They were not seasons that people thought Ohio State would win a national championship. 2014, Braxton Miller got hurt early in training camp, and people thought they're doomed. 2002, a series of close wins. Again, not a whole lot was expected of them that year, but they've had so many kind of juggernaut teams that have fallen short. So I think there's a part of the Ohio State fan base that's kind of conditioned to, okay, what's going to befall this team this year? But you look at Ohio State, and like you said, Joey, they have 2 question marks, and I would argue they're smaller question marks than they were last year. Because last year you really had 2 completely unproven quarterbacks in Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. This year you at least have somebody with a lot of experience in Will Howard. It remains to be seen. Can he raise his game and become an elite passer, or at least a really good passer? I mean, we know he's a good leader. We know he can run. But look, most of the job is throwing the ball, and that's a little bit shakier in terms of Will Howard. He didn't look great in the spring, and a lot of that can be attributed to new system, new teammates, new coaches, everything. Even the offensive coordinator changed on him. I went from Bill O'Brien to Chip Kelly. So I did talk to Chip Kelly and kind of got the rundown on the quarterbacks, and he feels like that Will Howard is caught up, and he's ready to go completely caught up with the offense and is ready to go on Thursday. In terms of the offensive line, I think the optimism stems from a couple things. One is those guys are now a year older. They're, Donovan Jackson came back. Josh Simmons has a year under his belt at left tackle. Josh Fryer, by all accounts, had a really good offseason. He's at right tackle. So you have center and left guard and right guard that are kind of the issues. And at center, you got Seth McLaughlin. And that's a big addition. The Alabama transfer, if he could get the snapping yips taken care of, and apparently he did, from what we've heard. It's a veteran presence in the middle of the line, which they didn't have last year. And then at right guard, they feel like Carson Hinsman, who did play center last year, is up to it, or Luke Montgomery or Tegre Shabola, any of those guys. So they feel better about the line. this year than last year, but yeah, you're right, Joey. Those are the two biggest question marks on the team because the defense looks lights out.
With Will Howard, part of the intrigue with him is just how much I think he can be an upgrade over Kyle McCord. And you look at that quarterback competition, I think there's certainly some curiosity over how long it will continue to be a competition. Could Devin Brown make a real case for the starting job? But Will Howard, by fact of just coming through the transfer portal with a year of experience or a year of eligibility remaining, it's sort of his time to win that job is now, and there are all those sort of subplots to a quarterback competition in August. But to me, ultimately, when you sort of step back and take a more of a big picture look at it, is they need, I think, a little more juice out of that position. Either maybe that's Will Howard's legs as a runner or just being able to manufacture more touchdowns. I mean, Kyle McCord threw for 24 touchdowns last year. CJ Stroud threw for 40 plus in his 2 years. Each of his 2 years as Ohio State starting quarterback. That was a big difference. Can Will do that? And there has been a track record in recent years in college football with the older, more experienced quarterbacks, especially last year. The super senior quarterback. You saw it at Oregon with Bo Nix. You saw it at Washington with Michael Penix. And with that extra year of experience, it'll be, I think, a chance for maybe Ohio State to try to find something and see if Will Howard has another level, because they need more, I think, out of that position to go all the way that they certainly hope to.
I mean, even think about Joe Burrow, and I'm not comparing Will Howard to Joe Burrow, but Joe Burrow's first year at LSU was good, but it didn't give any indication of how spectacular he would be in his final year. I mean, he had maybe the greatest season that any college quarterback's ever had in his last year at LSU. And again, I don't know that you would have foreseen that based on the first year at LSU. Now, obviously, this is going to be Will Howard's first and only year at Ohio State, but he is a fifth-year senior, and he knows, look, everything's at stake for him too, right? If he wants to be an NFL quarterback, he's got to prove it this year. And also, Devin Brown is a year more experienced. I mean, it's a shame he didn't get a chance to show what he could do in the Cotton Bowl before he got hurt. But you know, he's got a good arm. He obviously could run. I mean, the issues for him have been, well, the main thing is staying healthy. I mean, he got hurt numerous times last year. And he didn't show a whole lot when he was able to play. I mean, it's he had a chance to win the job at the end of training camp last year and had a couple bad practices and threw some picks from what I understand, and that cost him a chance for the job. So if he can rein that in, I mean, he's got all the tools on paper for sure.
They like that both, whether it ends up being Will Howard or Devin Brown, both have the threat as a runner, which I think will help Ohio State potentially solve some of its issues in the red zone in recent years, because that's been a time where they've stalled out and not maybe finished drives the way they go. So it's sort of been it's interesting to hear Ryan Day talk about that position this offseason, because they certainly seem to be maybe conscious of getting a sort of a more varied skill set from their starting quarterback.
Yeah, and you look around them. I mean, if you have a threat as a runner and you can make all 11 on defense. I mean, you know, essentially, Urban Meyer talks about this all the time. The spread gives you essentially an extra player. If the quarterback can run, it's another player the defense has to account for. So if Will Howard can run, 5 to 10 times a game, and it doesn't have to be design runs, it can be scrambles and just it's 3rd and 6, and you run for the first down or move the chains. That's so important. And he's got, I mean, think about the weapons he has around him. I mean, just think about it, assuming the offensive line holds up. You have the best running back tandem in the country with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. And you have, a healthy Emeka Egbuka, because he wasn't most of last year. And you have Carnell Tate, who wowed people last year as a freshman. And then you've got I don't know how you even describe him, Jeremiah Smith, who people run out of adjectives to describe him. And so, and several others, Brandon Innes and some of those guys could also, step up and become real threats. And so you look at who Will Howard or Devin Brown or whoever the quarterback is has around him, and you go, wow. I mean, Just get the ball to him. And that's kind of been a mantra for Ohio State over the years for the quarterback. Just get the ball into the playmakers' hands and let them do the work. Well, he's got the playmakers do it.
Yeah, especially with guys like you mentioned Brandon, as he is going to be healthy for fall camp. You might remember he did not play in the spring game because of a foot injury. He's at full strength and will be healthy. It's interesting because there really is so much talent at wide receiver at Ohio State. They lost Marvin Harrison Jr., who was a top five NFL draft pick, and we have not really written a rush of stories about how they will replace arguably their best receiver that they've had in school history. Sure, maybe at least as talented. He was the highest drafted receiver ever from Ohio State, and there's the wave of expectations for sort of this next group of receivers is high enough that it has not been a dominant offseason storyline. You have Emeka Egbuka back, but you also have Jeremiah Smith, Brandon Inniss, and Carnell Tate, and it was interesting. It was sort of amusing in a way, almost to hear Ryan Day at media days where he gets asked about Jeremiah Smith, and he didn't really want to talk about it too much. He said, "I'll wait for him to play his first snap at Ohio State," but you could just sort of feel him trying to temper expectations a little bit. For him,
he literally made his knees buckle on the in the Sunny Day press conference. When Jeremiah Smith was being courted by University of Miami. That's where he's from, and there was real signing day drama. And when Ryan Day got the word from the lectern that yes, in fact, Jeremiah Smith would be a Buckeye, he literally knees buckled. He bent over he just dodged a bullet, and so. I
remember being in the room during that, and it was at a time when a couple weeks after losing to Michigan, they're not in the playoff, and so the idea of potentially losing your top recruit in your class, I almost felt the reaction maybe was in part just due to you need the PR win or that sort of sideline, that good feeling for your program. You don't want to have the sort of the narrative start to really go in the other direction, but when you watch Jeremiah Smith in spring practice, I think maybe you got to understand, no, they really wanted him to be a part of the offense. He's a very important, I think, piece for the future of Ohio State football. It wasn't just trying to sort of avoid the spectacle of losing somebody that magnitude for the class. It was the practical purposes of having him in the fold for the season, because it does seem like he's going to play. I mean, Bill, we were listening today at media days up on the podium on stage at Lucas Oil Stadium, and he was asked about the receiver depth, and he was listing all the guys, and you turned to me and said, one name who hasn't come up is Jeremiah Smith, and you could certainly do the math there, and probably because he's going to start.
Yeah. I'd be surprised if he doesn't start, and I think he's the first Ohio State freshman to start at wide receiver. I don't, at least in my time covering the team. I mean, you think about all the absolute studs they've had: Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. None of those guys started as freshmen. Chris Olave kind of had his breakout game as a freshman against Michigan, and a lot of those, he blocked some punts and did some stuff like that. But for somebody to come in and kind of be presumed to be an opening game starter, that's just kind of crazy. I mean, but that's how good he is. I mean, he doesn't look 18. I mean, you look at him, he looks like an NFL player. He's 6'3", I think, and just chiseled. And we haven't talked to him. They haven't made him available. So, but by all accounts, I talked to Emeka Egbuka about him, and Ryan Day's talked about him. A very mature kid, just about his business, doesn't get swept up in the hype, just a worker. And if he has the talent and the work ethic and the maturity, boy, you got something.
He does seem to be a little bit in the mold of the receivers they've had in recent years, just very business-like, the way people talk about him and the way he puts in his preparation. But I think that was almost a moment of media days where you learn something by sort of what the coach didn't say. Yeah, what right. Ryan Day refused to sort of give sort of the perfunctory praise, like he's great, he's all that. He was very much interested in holding off. And then at the podium where he did mention Jeremiah Smith as a reserve or a depth chart. So both of those things I think told you a lot where he stands, and certainly I think he's as intriguing as anybody on the roster going into preseason camp. Media days was not a point in time where there were a ton of unanswered questions about the roster. It was more maybe some big picture takeaways of the team, the state of college football, maybe some questions about certain guys. But as we sort of come out of that and look ahead to fall camp, I don't know if there's anything you're particularly interested in seeing as things open up on Thursday. We will get to watch practices, at least on Thursday and Friday, which are open to the public as well as to the media. But any position battles you think or players that you are sort of interested in getting your eyes on?
I don't think I've ever said this going to a fall camp, but I think the most interested in seeing the right guard competition. How's that? I mean, that's the only open position on the offense. And I guess maybe on defense, the transition of Sonny Styles to linebacker. I mean, he was kind of a hybrid last year, hybrid safety linebacker a bit last year, but now he's a full-fledged linebacker. I'll be curious to see how he looks there. And CJ Hicks, who's going to, be the starter this year, former five-star guy, was the highest rated recruit in the class a couple years ago, and has to be able to get on the field because you had veteran guys ahead of him. So I'm curious about that, just how dominant are Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau in their senior years. And then, and of course, I'm curious to see Caleb Downs. I mean, I think I know the answer. I mean, he's great, but I want to see it.
Want to see him on offense or defense?
Defense. I mean, the running back thing, I mean, I suppose if Travion Henderson or Quinshon Judkins got hurt, that'd be a viable thing to consider, but I think that he's a defensive player. I think Day was kind of humoring us and humoring him to some degree by having the talk in the spring or early summer about him taking some snaps at tailback. I mean, he could. I mean, he's talented enough, but he's a safety for a reason. I think they want to keep him there.
Yeah, there's not a lot of depth at safety, so you really can't afford to lose them on the back end just because they're not the number of bodies back there as you had last season. They could. I know people will sort of think about him as a running back as in terms of a worst case scenario contingency plan if guys really go down. But I mean, they could also use him as a change of pace there at times. I don't know. It doesn't sound like it's something that's immediately going to happen. Ryan Day said that last week that he'll start out at safety and they're going to focus on that. But how they decide to use him in maybe some other settings, maybe special teams, he returned some punts for Alabama. I think that may be a more likely possibility. There is a way for them probably to get the ball in his hand to some degree. It's probably just more likely going to be as a returner rather than a running back. But hey, we'll see how creative they want to be or how much they want to roll the dice there.
Well, it's been a while since Ohio State really had a threat as a punt returner. You think about, the talent that Ohio State had, you'd think they'd be breaking long punt returns fairly consistently. They haven't done that, even with pretty good players back there. I think there's probably going to be an upgrade in special teams coaching. And honestly, that's the one thing I don't think that we've talked about enough is the upgrade in the coaching staff. It's for the first time, Ryan Day feels really comfortable with his entire staff. It's always been plug and a leak on one side of the ball or the other. 3 years ago, you had the chaos almost on defense when he had to demote Kerry Combs and kind of promote Matt Barnes, and it just was trying to plug it a little bit. Then last year, the offense really struggled because they had lost Kevin Wilson and they promoted Brian Hartline, but he was not a play caller. And you had, Corey Dennis as your quarterback's coach. And, to sit there and say that Chip Kelly's an upgrade over Corey Dennis, no offense to Corey Dennis, but I mean, it's Chip Kelly. And it's not just his X's and O's expertise, it's the chemistry he has with Ryan Day that's gone back a long, long time. I mean, I've got a story coming to talk about that relationship. So hopefully you'll be interested in reading that. But they are very, very close, and they are kindred football minds as well. And so for Ryan Day to be able to take a step back and feel as good about the offense being in Chip Kelly's hands as he does with the defense being in Jim Knowles' hands, is huge. I mean, it's huge because a coach today has so many responsibilities outside of the X's and O's, NIL, roster retention. I mean, recruiting, all that stuff. That to sit there and as Ryan Day told me to kind of be worried on Thursday night, what do we call on 3rd and 7 in the red zone? That's not how a head coach should be spending his time. He gets worn down. And so this year, for the first time, I think on both sides of the ball, he feels really good about his staff.
Yeah, the head coach nowadays is part football coach, part administrator, part general manager, because you're doing so much fundraising, roster management, all of that. When you talk about the staff, I think there are sort of two ways you can look at the way Ohio State's changed its coaching staff for this year, Bill. You mentioned Chip Kelly, and certainly the stature that he brings as he takes over play calling duties and is an upgrade over Corey Dennis, just especially in terms of experience and just sort of the football knowledge that Chip Kelly has, been around the block for such a long time. But they're balanced between the offense and defensive staff for the first time in Ryan Day's tenure. They have 5 full-time or 5. We've historically called them on-field assistant coaches, but we can get into that in a second. But they have 5 primary assistants on defense, 5 primary guys on offense. They no longer have a true special teams coordinator like they've had throughout his tenure between Parker Fleming, and then before that it was Matt Barnes. They've divided up those special teams coaching duties between a handful of assistants like they did in spring practice. But in late June, so last month, the NCAA passed new legislation which removed the limits on the number of coaches who can coach players on the field. So in the practical effect of that is all of those analysts and quality control coaches and program assistants that Ohio State has, who largely their job in recent seasons has been to watch film and sort of help the coaching staff script meetings. Now those coaches can, one, coach players on the field during practice and lead meetings. Probably the biggest potential practical effect for this year will be with special teams. They have Rob Keys, who was a former coach at Findlay a few years ago. He's been on staff as a support staff guy and has had a big role in special teams. He can be more directly involved in coaching guys during practice. And Ryan Day told us last week that he'll also lead the special teams meeting. So because the staff is balanced, to get the balanced staff, they did away with having a special teams coach, and now they can have their special teams analysts and Rob Keys be more intimately involved in doing some on-field coaching. So it's, I think, a better staff setup for Ohio State this year. And I think the passage of these new NCAA rules certainly help Ohio State sort of patch up some holes in special teams. And there was not only did the fact you got a special teams coach or coordinator lead to this imbalanced staff, but you also have a special teams coach who is going to go on the road recruiting essentially just 3 guys every year: a punter, kicker, and maybe a long snapper. I mean, I think it's just a more valuable situation to have a assistant with a larger position group out recruiting for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really underrated rule change, because in the past, those staffers, quality control, or whatever you want to call them, they had to kind of walk this fine line. I'm sure that there are probably NCAA violations all the time, because, what's on-field coaching and what isn't. I mean, right? I mean, what is right. It's a gray area. So at least now they kind of take that gray area away. It's okay, we're not going to kind of pretend anymore. You can just coach. And so, yes, especially for kickers, that's going to be nice for them. James Laurinaitis was essentially in that kind of role last year. Well, now he's the actual linebackers coach, so it's not an issue. But he had limitations last year. As a quality control guy or graduate assistant or whatever.
He was a GA, so he actually could recruit, or not recruit, but be more involved in coaching guys. He could coach guys during practice because GAs can. Right.
But there were quality control guys who, were not supposed to, and that was they couldn't.
Like Joe Philbin last year, he could not coach a practice guy, but
that would have been,
now could.
He was an offensive line guy, and that would have probably helped him a lot if he could have done more with the offensive line. So yeah, now that's not just for Ohio State. That's obviously for everybody. But I think that for Ohio State, that has almost seemingly unlimited resources to spend, it probably helps at Ohio State more than it would a school with limited resources.
Yeah, I would certainly think so, just because Ohio State already had the largest assistant coach salary staff pool in the nation last year, and they upgraded that this year with Chip Kelly and then the moves they made there. And now I would not expect it to be much different in terms of their ability to supplement the primary staff with some support staff guys.
Yep. Well, we'll have a lot more to say as spring practice really heats up starting Thursday. It's maybe the most anticipated Ohio State season that I can recall.
People have said that. You were here obviously after they won the 14 title. Was 15 not more anticipated? They were preseason number one that season.
Yeah.
It probably didn't leave people with a great feeling by November, but I would
No,
have thought at least in July.
I think there's more hunger now because that team had won a national championship. That was kind of like can this team go down as one of the greats of all time?
Mm-hmm.
This is, they've lost to Michigan 3 years in a row. They watched Michigan win the national championship. They kept their guys. They added some key transfers. They added Chip Kelly. It seems like all the pieces are in place. And I think there's a combination among Ohio State fans. And I always hesitate to speak for Ohio State fans because, it's no way to get in the minds of all of them. But I think there's part of them is just crazy excitement for how good this team can be. And also like this trepidation about, how are they going to let us down this time? Because like I said, we talked about earlier, it's happened so many times in the past. And you look on paper and you say the schedule is certainly manageable. A tough game, obviously, at Oregon, tough game at Penn State, obviously you have Michigan. But those are the three. You don't have a tough non-conference game. I mean, that Oregon essentially kind of replaces that. And now you have an expanded playoff. I mean, there's no excuse for Ohio State not to be in the playoff. I mean, if they don't make the playoff, it will be catastrophic. And I don't know how Ryan Day would possibly survive that because it would probably mean another loss to Michigan. I mean, but I don't expect that to happen. I certainly expect Ohio State to make the playoffs. I would expect them to be a top 4 team. They're probably going to be one. They're going to be 1 or 2 when the preseason polls come out. The Ohio State and Georgia. I would guess that Georgia would be number 1, but I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State's number 1. Oregon could be 3, but I think it's clear that Ohio State and Georgia are going to be 1 and 2 in some order. And so you have, and they should be. I mean, you look at the roster and you go on defense, they've got no holes that I can see. Again, injuries can change that, but as of right now, they look like that was a great defense last year. And so you look at the defense, say, good luck, scoring on that team. And then you look at the offense. Say if Will Howard or whoever the quarterback is plays to the level that they need, and the offensive line is okay, then I mean that's a juggernaut. So you always have those kind of competing emotions in your head. Boy, they're going to be really good, and I hope they don't blow it. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think your point about their national championship winning seasons coming in years where you didn't anticipate it is accurate. I mean, I was just pulling this up. You look at their national championships or the times in the AP poll when they finished number 1 overall in 14, 02, 68, 54, 42. I pulled up College Football Reference. In 14, when they finished number 1 in the AP poll, they were 5th in the preseason. So actually high-ish.
Well, that was before Braxton Miller's injury, because I think in the first week they were like 14 or something like that.
Yeah. And then in 02, 13th in the preseason.
Yeah.
1968, 11th in the preseason. 1954, 20th in the preseason. Then 1942, I don't know if there was a preseason poll. It doesn't show a number, which either means they were unranked or people were preoccupied with other things in 1954, 1942.
What would that have been, Joey? You're a young guy. Let's see if you know what that would have been.
Come
on.
The Great War.
No, not the Great War.
The Great War II. World War II.
World War II. World War II. Yes. Yeah. So, people college football was not first and foremost on people's minds in 1942.
No, so I don't know if there was a preseason poll or not. But your point's right. There is not a situation where Ohio State went wire to wire number one to win a national championship. They sort of could have maybe have done that in 06. They were preseason number one in 06, but obviously did not complete the.
Did not end well.
No, no, but unbeaten regular season at least. So they were not far out of the picture. But a lot of these highly anticipated seasons have not ended with a national championship. There's no situation where they went sort of wire to wire. And I don't know if they'll be preseason number one. My guess is they'll be number two behind Georgia, just based on sort of the preseason magazines. But we'll find out here when the polls get released in a few weeks.
Yeah, but they are going to be the clear favorite in the Big Ten. Oregon is a legitimate contender. I mean, Oregon's really good. Most people expect Michigan to fall off. They don't. Michigan doesn't expect that, but they lost a ton. They lost their coach. They lost Connor Stallions. They lost J.J. McCarthy, Blake Corum. A lot of guys. So, the funny thing is, that's the season in a lot of ways. Yes, Oregon's important. Yes, Penn State's important. But that Michigan game, geez, that's everything in certain ways. Everything to that point, at least. If they get the monkey off the back of that game, and then they go into the playoffs. They'd have to win the Big Ten championship because that gives them a bye. But if they, it's huge. You can't even understate or overstate how big that is.
Yeah, you can. You can overstate it.
Go ahead, overstate it. What would you say?
You can overstate it. You don't need to. I would say you could overstate it because you don't actually need to win that game to win a national championship.
Yeah, but unless they were to play Michigan in the playoff and beat them, I still think if you're asking Ohio State fan, and Bill Bender from the Sporting News had this. I think he might have written a story. I haven't seen it yet, but kind of posing that question: can Ohio State lose to Michigan, win the national championship, and have it feel like unconditional glee? Or is there still that little nagging this was, not an asterisk, but at least a nagging damn. I think he's onto something. I think if Ohio State were to, lose to Michigan and then win the national championship without having played Michigan again, I still think there'd be part of the fan base that would be like, it's not hollow, but it's not complete either.
I suspect you would be right. It would be, I think, that's a fun scenario. That would be an interesting psychological experiment for people in this part of the country. Just
now, they don't want that experiment. I can assure you.
As an observer, as an observer of college football, trying to understand this new college football world. I think it would be interesting. We probably could almost do a podcast episode.
Yeah. The flip side is, would they rather? I don't say most. I think most would not agree with this. But what percentage of Ohio State fans would rather beat Michigan and not win the playoff versus lose to Michigan and win the playoff? I don't think it's 100%. Put it that way. I think there would be some fans that would say, "Give me the Michigan win, give me that one," and then the rest is kind of gravy. I think that's a minority, but I don't know that it's a small minority.
No, I think
send us your feedback, people.
Yeah, send us. We could pose that question for our tech subscribers. But yeah, I think that's could be interesting. Yeah, it's a whole new season. The way we talk and think about this team will be different because there's no game on the schedule, at least starting out. Eventually losses do pile up, but seemingly no one game can totally derail your season the same way it could in previous years. The Oregon game, when they played that first big game against Oregon, does not carry the same weight as it would have if it was played last year.
No, I wrote that before the Michigan game last year. Kind of enjoy it. This is the last of for all the marbles games. That was it.
Yeah, enjoy it. And
they didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
They did not enjoy it at all, Joey. Not at all.
Now,
should we wrap it up? And
we will segue out of here. Thanks for joining us on our newest edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. That was Bill Rabinowitz. I'm Joey Kaufman. We'll be in your feeds more frequently as we ramp up for the start of the season. Thanks for downloading and listening. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you subscribe to podcasts. Football season is fast approaching. Thanks for listening, Buckeye fans.